Welcome, brave listener, to the chilling story of Blackwood Boarding School. Nestled in the remote shadows of ancient oak trees, this school once promised prestige and excellence, but beneath its ivy-covered walls hid a dark and sinister secret. Decades of whispered rumors and missing students suggest a malevolent force, a darkness that binds together the very foundations of the school. Join Emma and Liam as they unravel the basement's horrific mysteries, confront ghostly apparitions, and confront an ancient evil that seeks to consume all who dare defy it. Their journey is fraught with danger, twisted shadows, and secrets that defy understanding. Will they emerge victorious, or will the darkness claim them as it has so many before? Enter the haunted halls of Blackwood Boarding School and discover the terror that awaits.
Welcome to my home.
The terrifying secrets of Blackwood Boarding School. In the quiet outskirts of a small town, hidden behind ancient oaks and overgrown ivy, stood Blackwood Boarding School. Its grand facade, once a beacon of prestigious education, now loomed ominously under a perpetually gray sky. The whispers among the students spoke of an old basement that lay beneath the school's foundations, a place shrouded in mystery and dread. The protagonist of our story is Emma, a diligent student with a knack for uncovering secrets. Her best friend, Liam, a mischievous yet loyal companion, often joined her in her adventures. Their favorite teacher, Mr. Hargrove, a kind but stern man with a passion for history, would sometimes indulge their curiosity with tales of the school's past. Then there was the headmistress, Mrs. Thorne, a stern woman whose icy demeanor sent shivers down the spines of students and teachers alike. One chilly autumn evening, Emma and Liam were in the library, finishing their homework under the flickering fluorescent lights. Mr. Hargrove had just left, and they were about to pack up when they stumbled upon an old, dusty map of the school. Hidden in the margins was a sketch of the basement, marked with strange symbols and notes in a spidery handwriting. "Look at this, Liam," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I've never seen this part of the school before." Liam leaned in, his playful demeanor giving way to intrigue. "Do you think it's still there? The basement?" "Only one way to find out," Emma replied, a determined glint in her eye. As night fell, the two friends made their way to the basement entrance, a heavy wooden door half concealed behind a crumbling stone staircase. The air grew colder as they descended, the light from their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The basement was a labyrinth of forgotten classrooms and storage rooms, filled with old desks, broken chairs, and stacks of yellowed papers. As they ventured deeper, they heard faint whispers echoing through the halls. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but she pressed on, drawn by an inexplicable urge to uncover the truth. Liam followed closely, his bravado fading with each step. They reached a large, iron door at the end of the corridor. It creaked open to reveal a cavernous room, dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb. In the center of the room stood an old, wooden desk, and behind it sat Mrs. Thorne. Her cold eyes locked onto Emma and Liam as they entered. "Welcome, children," she said, her voice dripping with an unnatural calm. "I've been expecting you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What is this place?" she managed to ask. Mrs. Thorne's lips curled into a sinister smile. "This is where the secrets of Blackwood Boarding School are kept. And now, you've discovered them." The room seemed to close in around them, the walls whispering secrets of long-forgotten tragedies and unspeakable horrors. Emma and Liam realized they were not alone. Shadows moved in the corners, and faint, ghostly figures appeared, their eyes filled with sorrow and anger. "Why are you showing us this?" Liam demanded, his voice trembling. "Because," Mrs. Thorne replied, rising from her chair, "you've been chosen to carry the burden of these secrets. To live with the knowledge of what happened here, and to ensure it never happens again." Emma and Liam exchanged a terrified glance. They had uncovered the darkness that lay beneath Blackwood Boarding School, and now it was up to them to confront it. The basement held more than just old desks and forgotten papers. It held the echoes of the past, waiting to be heard. As they fled the basement, the whispers followed them, a chilling reminder that some secrets are better left buried. But Emma knew they couldn't turn back now. They had to unravel the mystery, for the sake of the lost souls trapped within the school's walls, and for their own sanity. And so, their journey into the heart of Blackwood Boarding School's darkness began, each step drawing them closer to the truth, and to the unspeakable horrors that awaited them. Mr. Hargrove was known for his meticulous nature and dedication to uncovering the truth. He often spent late nights in his study, poring over old documents and records of Blackwood Boarding School. Tonight was no different. The dim glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across the room as he sifted through a pile of ancient manuscripts. He had always been fascinated by the school's history, especially the legends surrounding the basement. Whispers of ghostly apparitions, mysterious disappearances, and unexplainable events had circulated among the staff for years. Mr. Hargrove had dismissed them as mere stories until he stumbled upon a hidden diary in the school archives, belonging to a former headmaster named Edgar Whitlock. The diary entries were filled with cryptic notes and drawings, detailing strange rituals and inexplicable phenomena centered around the basement. Whitlock's obsession with the supernatural had led him to perform dark ceremonies in the hopes of unlocking otherworldly powers. These practices had left a lasting scar on the school, one that continued to fester beneath the surface. Mr. Hargrove felt a chill run down his spine as he read Whitlock's final entry, underscore the darkness in the basement grows stronger with each passing day. It whispers to me, promising unimaginable power. I fear what I have unleashed, and I pray that someone will put an end to this madness before it consumes us all. Underscore. Determined to uncover the truth, Mr. Hargrove decided to visit the basement himself. He armed himself with the diary, a flashlight, and a sense of duty to protect his students. As he descended the creaking stairs, the air grew colder, and the oppressive silence enveloped him. He reached the iron door, now ajar, and cautiously stepped inside. The cavernous room seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy. Mr. Hargrove's flashlight flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of the ghostly figures that lingered in the shadows. He could hear faint whispers, the same ones described by Whitlock. Steeling himself, Mr. Hargrove approached the old wooden desk at the center of the room. His heart pounded as he saw Mrs. Thorne's figure materialize behind it, just as Emma and Liam had described. She looked up, her eyes cold and calculating. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice echoing in the chamber. "I knew you would come." He clenched the diary tightly. "What have you done, Mrs. Thorne? What is this place?" "This is the heart of Blackwood's power," she replied, her smile devoid of warmth. "Edgar Whitlock's experiments opened a gateway to the other side. Now, it is up to us to control it." Mr. Hargrove felt a surge of anger. "You're using the students, aren't you? Their fear, their energy, it's feeding this darkness." Mrs. Thorne's expression remained unchanged. "They are means to an end. We must harness this power to protect the school. Sacrifices must be made." "No," Mr. Hargrove said firmly. "I won't allow it. We must find a way to close this gateway, to end this madness." Mrs. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Mr. Hargrove. You have no idea what you're dealing with." With those words, the ghostly figures began to close in, their mournful wails echoing through the chamber. Mr. Hargrove realized that the basement's darkness was far more powerful than he had anticipated. But he couldn't give up. For Emma, Liam, and all the students of Blackwood Boarding School, he had to find a way to break the curse and restore peace to the school. As he fled the basement, his mind raced with plans to uncover more about Whitlock's rituals and how to counteract them. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He would need Emma and Liam's help to gather the pieces of this dark puzzle and put an end to the horrors lurking beneath Blackwood Boarding School. Mr. Hargrove returned to his study, his mind racing with the revelations from the basement. The diary of Edgar Whitlock held many secrets, but it also left many questions unanswered. He knew that to break the curse, he would need to understand the rituals Whitlock had performed and the true nature of the darkness that had taken hold of the school. Sitting at his desk, he carefully examined Whitlock's notes, searching for any clues that might help him. He discovered references to ancient texts and symbols, many of which were linked to arcane practices and forbidden knowledge. One name kept appearing in the diary, the Book of Shadows. According to Whitlock, the Book of Shadows was an ancient tome containing powerful incantations and rituals. It was said to have been hidden somewhere within the school, a safeguard against those who might misuse its power. If Mr. Hargrove could find this book, he might be able to reverse the rituals and close the gateway. With renewed determination, Mr. Hargrove set out to search the school's archives and hidden rooms. He started in the library, combing through old records and forgotten manuscripts. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. Hours passed, and just as he was about to give up for the night, he stumbled upon a hidden compartment in one of the oldest bookshelves. Inside, he found a weathered, leather-bound book, its cover adorned with strange symbols. As he opened it, he realized he had found the Book of Shadows. The book's pages were filled with intricate diagrams and incantations, written in a language Mr. Hargrove barely recognized. He would need time to decipher its contents, but he was certain this was the key to stopping the darkness. As he pored over the book, he heard a faint knock on his door. Startled, he looked up to see Mrs. Thorne standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I see you found it," she said, her voice as cold as ever. Mr. Hargrove stood his ground. "This book contains the answers we need to stop the darkness, Mrs. Thorne. We can't keep sacrificing the students." Mrs. Thorne stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "You don't understand, Mr. Hargrove. The darkness is part of the school's foundation. Removing it could destroy Blackwood." Mr. Hargrove shook his head. "We have to try. We can't let this continue." Mrs. Thorne's eyes softened, just for a moment. "Very well. But know this, if you fail, the consequences will be dire." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Mr. Hargrove alone with the Book of Shadows. He knew time was running out, and he had to act quickly. Meanwhile, Emma and Liam were determined to find out more about the basement's secrets. They felt something was terribly wrong and knew they needed to let Mr. Hargrove know about their discovery. Emma and Liam, shaken but resolute, fled the basement, their footsteps echoing through the deserted halls of Blackwood Boarding School. They had seen enough to know that something sinister was lurking beneath the school's foundation. Their encounter with Mrs. Thorne had left them with more questions than answers, and they knew they had to find out more about the dark history of the school. Back in their dormitory, they whispered in hushed tones, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. "We need to find out more about Edgar Whitlock," Emma said, her eyes determined. "There has to be something in the school archives that can help us." Liam nodded, still shaken. "And we need to talk to Mr. Hargrove. He knows more about the school's history than anyone." The next day, they made their way to the library, where Mr. Hargrove was often found. As they entered, they saw him hunched over a large, leather-bound book, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp. "Mr. Hargrove," Emma called softly, approaching him. "We need to talk to you." He looked up, his eyes tired but alert. "Emma, Liam, what brings you here?" They quickly recounted their experience in the basement, describing the iron door, the ghostly figures, and their encounter with Mrs. Thorne. Mr. Hargrove listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. "I suspected as much," he said finally. "Mrs. Thorne is deeply involved in the school's dark past. And I've found something that might help us." He gestured to the book on his desk. "This is the Book of Shadows, an ancient tome that Whitlock used in his rituals. If we can decipher it, we might be able to close the gateway and end this nightmare." Emma and Liam exchanged a glance. "What do we need to do?" Liam asked. Mr. Hargrove sighed. "The book is written in a cryptic language. I'll need your help to decode it. And we'll need to find any other documents related to Whitlock's rituals." The three of them spent hours in the library, poring over the Book of Shadows and searching for clues. They uncovered references to various symbols and incantations, as well as descriptions of the rituals Whitlock had performed. It was slow, painful work, but they were determined to see it through. As night fell, they took a break, gathering in a quiet corner of the library. The weight of their task hung heavily over them. "We're getting closer," Emma said, her voice resolute. "But we need more help. We can't do this alone." Liam nodded. "What about some of the other students? Maybe they can help us find more information." Mr. Hargrove agreed. "We need to be careful, but you're right. Let's gather a few trusted friends and form a plan." The following day, Emma and Liam discreetly approached a few of their classmates, sharing just enough to enlist their help without revealing the full extent of the danger. They managed to convince 3 other students to join their cause: Sarah, a tech-savvy girl with a knack for hacking into the school's old records; Jake, a sports enthusiast with a keen sense of adventure; and Nora, a quiet, observant student with a talent for piecing together puzzles. That evening, the group gathered in the library, their faces illuminated by the flickering candles they had brought to avoid detection. "Thank you all for coming," Emma began, her voice steady. "We need to find out more about the school's history and the rituals performed by Edgar Whitlock. It's the only way to stop whatever is happening in the basement." Sarah pulled out her laptop, already connected to the school's ancient network. "I'll see what I can find in the digital archives." Jake cracked his knuckles, ready for action. "Just tell me what to look for." Nora nodded, her eyes focused. "I'll help with the decoding. We need to understand those rituals." As the group worked together, their combined efforts began to yield results. They uncovered hidden records, decoded symbols, and pieced together the fragmented history of Blackwood Boarding School. The air grew thick with anticipation and fear, but also with a sense of camaraderie and determination. Hours later, as the clock struck midnight, they had gathered enough information to form a plan. They knew the risks were great, but they also knew they couldn't turn back now. The following night, the group gathered in a secluded classroom, their expressions grim but determined. The information they had uncovered painted a chilling picture of Blackwood Boarding School's past, and they knew that confronting Mrs. Thorne was their only option. Mr. Hargrove spread out the Book of Shadows and the other documents they had gathered on a large table. "We've made significant progress," he began. "We've deciphered most of Whitlock's rituals, and we believe we know how to close the gateway. But it's not going to be easy." Emma leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "What do we need to do?" Mr. Hargrove pointed to a detailed diagram in the book. "We need to perform a counter-ritual in the basement, right where the original ceremonies took place. This will require all of us to work together and follow the instructions precisely. Any mistake could be disastrous." Sarah, Jake, and Nora listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and determination. "We'll need to gather a few specific items," Mr. Hargrove continued. "Candles, chalk for drawing the symbols, and a few herbs mentioned in the book. Sarah, can you find a way to access the storage room? It should have most of what we need." Sarah nodded confidently. "Consider it done. Jake, we need you to keep watch. Make sure no one interrupts us while we're in the basement." Jake gave a firm nod. "I'm on it." "Nora," Mr. Hargrove said, turning to her, "you'll help me with the ritual. Your attention to detail will be crucial." Nora nodded, her eyes focused. "I'll do my best." Emma and Liam exchanged a glance. "What about us?" Liam asked. "You two will be our support," Mr. Hargrove replied. "Stay close, keep an eye out for any signs of trouble, and be ready to help if anything goes wrong." With their roles assigned, the group dispersed to gather the necessary items. Sarah used her tech skills to hack into the storage room's security system, allowing them to access the supplies they needed without setting off any alarms. Jake scouted the basement, identifying potential hiding spots and escape routes. Nora studied the Book of Shadows, memorizing the intricate details of the counter-ritual. By the time they reconvened, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. They had everything they needed, and it was time to put their plan into action. Late that night, under the cover of darkness, the group made their way to the basement. The air was thick with tension as they descended the creaking stairs, their footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. They reached the large, iron door and pushed it open, revealing the cavernous room where their ordeal had begun. Mr. Hardgrove set up the candles, arranging them in a precise pattern around the room. Nora drew the symbols on the floor with chalk, her hand steady despite the fear gnawing at her. The rest of the group took their positions, ready to play their parts in the ritual. As they lit the candles, the room seemed to come alive with a sinister energy. Shadows flickered on the walls, and the faint whispers of the past grew louder. Emma and Liam exchanged a nervous glance, but held their ground. Mr. Hardgrove began to chant the incantations from the Book of Shadows, his voice steady and resolute. Nora followed his lead, her voice harmonizing with his. The symbols on the floor glowed faintly, a sign that the ritual was taking effect. Suddenly, the door to the basement creaked open, and Mrs. Thorne stepped inside. Her expression was a mixture of anger and resignation. "So, you've decided to defy me," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Do you realize the danger you're putting yourselves in?" Emma stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "We know the risks, Mrs. Thorne. But we can't let this darkness continue to haunt Blackwood." Mrs. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand. The darkness is a part of this school. Removing it could destroy everything." "We have to try," Mr. Hardgrove replied, his voice firm. "For the sake of the students, for the sake of Blackwood's future." Mrs. Thorne took a step closer, the shadows around her seeming to pulse with malevolent energy. "Very well. But know this, if you fail, the consequences will be dire." With that, she retreated to the edge of the room, watching as the group continued the ritual. The tension in the air was palpable, and the room seemed to vibrate with the conflicting energies of light and darkness. As Mr. Hardgrove and Nora completed the final incantation, a blinding light filled the room, accompanied by a deafening roar. The ground shook, and the walls seemed to close in around them. For a moment, it felt as though the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and the room fell silent. The oppressive energy that had filled the basement was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. The group stood in stunned silence, barely able to believe what they had accomplished. Mrs. Thorne looked around, her expression unreadable. "You've done it," she said quietly. "You've closed the gateway." Emma, Liam, and their friends exchanged relieved smiles. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but they knew their journey was far from over. There were still many questions left unanswered, and the true extent of Blackwood Boarding School's secrets had yet to be fully uncovered. The days following the ritual were a blur of cautious optimism and uneasy peace. Blackwood Boarding School seemed to have returned to its normal, albeit eerie, routine. Emma, Liam, and their friends felt a sense of accomplishment, but a lingering dread remained. They knew that the darkness they had faced was just one layer of the school's sinister history. One evening, while studying in the library, Emma stumbled upon an old photograph tucked inside a dusty, forgotten book. The photograph showed a group of students from decades ago, their faces pale and eyes hollow. Scribbled on the back was a date, October 31st, 1956, and a single chilling word, vanished. Emma's heart pounded as she showed the photograph to Liam. "These students disappeared," she whispered, "and no one ever found out what happened to them." Liam's eyes widened. "We need to find out more. This can't be a coincidence." Their investigation led them to the oldest wing of the school, a section that had been closed off for years due to structural instability. With the help of Sarah's hacking skills, they bypassed the security systems and entered the forbidden area. The air was thick with dust and decay. Cobwebs hung from the ceilings, and the floorboards creaked ominously beneath their feet. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, and the temperature dropped the deeper they went. They reached an old classroom, its door barely hanging on its hinges. Inside, they found rows of empty desks and a large, ornate mirror on the far wall. The mirror's surface was clouded and cracked, but it emitted a faint, eerie glow. Emma approached the mirror cautiously, her reflection barely visible through the grime. "There's something off about this," she muttered. As she touched the mirror's surface, a cold chill shot through her hand. Suddenly, the room around them began to shift and warp. The walls twisted, and the floor seemed to dissolve beneath their feet. They were no longer in the old classroom. They had been transported to a dark, labyrinthine version of the school, one that pulsed with malevolent energy. The hallways were narrow and twisted, filled with shadows that whispered and moved. The air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. Emma and Liam clung to each other, their hearts pounding in their chests. "What is this place?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling. Emma shook her head, trying to steady her breathing. "I don't know, but we need to find a way out." They navigated the twisted corridors, the whispers growing louder with each step. The shadows seemed to follow them, their shapes becoming more distinct and terrifying. Faces with hollow eyes and twisted mouths emerged from the darkness, their ghostly forms reaching out as if to pull them into the void. Suddenly, they heard a familiar voice echoing through the labyrinth. "Help us!" Emma's blood ran cold. "Did you hear that?" Liam nodded, his face pale. It sounded like those students, the ones from the photograph. They followed the voice, their fear mounting with each step. The labyrinth seemed to stretch on forever, each turn leading them deeper into the nightmare. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber. In the center stood the ornate mirror, its surface now clear and reflecting a scene of unimaginable horror. The mirror showed the missing students, trapped in a nightmarish version of the school. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow and filled with despair. They reached out, their mouths forming silent pleas for help. "We need to break the mirror," Emma said, her voice resolute. "It's keeping them trapped here." Liam hesitated. "What if it traps us too?" "We don't have a choice," Emma replied. "We have to try." Together, they picked up a heavy, rusted piece of metal and swung it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, and a blinding light filled the chamber. The ground shook violently, and the shadows screamed in agony. When the light faded, Emma and Liam found themselves back in the old classroom, the mirror reduced to shards on the floor. The oppressive energy was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. They looked around, their hearts still racing. "Did it work?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded slowly. "I think so. But we need to make sure." They hurried back to the library, where they found Mr. Hargrove waiting for them. His eyes widened as they recounted their ordeal. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice grave. "But this is far from over. The mirror was just one part of the school's dark history. There are other artifacts, other traps set by Whitlock and his followers. We need to find and destroy them all to truly free Blackwood." Emma and Liam exchanged a determined glance. They had faced unimaginable horrors, but they knew their journey was far from over. The true terror of Blackwood Boarding School was still lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, Emma, Liam, and their friends gathered in the library with Mr. Hargrove. The previous night's ordeal had shaken them, but it had also strengthened their resolve. They knew that their battle against the darkness was far from over. Mr. Hargrove spread out a series of old maps and documents on the table. "We need to locate the remaining artifacts that are tied to Whitlock's rituals. Each one is a key part of the school's dark history and must be destroyed to break the curse entirely." Sarah, who had been researching late into the night, pointed to a map of the school grounds. "I found references to 3 more artifacts, an old bell in the belfry, a diary hidden in the headmaster's office, and a locket buried in the school cemetery." "Let's split up," Mr. Hargrove suggested. "We'll cover more ground that way. Emma and Liam, you take the belfry. Sarah and Jake, check the headmaster's office. Nora and I will handle the cemetery." With their plan in place, the group set out on their respective missions, each knowing the dangers that awaited them. The belfry Emma and Liam made their way to the old belfry, a towering structure that loomed over the school like a sentinel. The stairs creaked ominously as they ascended, each step echoing in the silence. As they reached the top, The air grew colder, and an eerie, high-pitched ringing filled their ears. In the center of the belfry stood the ancient bell, its surface tarnished and covered in strange symbols. Emma approached it cautiously, her flashlight flickering. "This must be it," she whispered. Liam nodded, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. "Let's get this over with." As they examined the bell, they noticed a series of runes etched into its surface. Mr. Hargrove had given them a specific chant to neutralize the bell's power. Emma began to recite the words, her voice steady despite the growing sense of dread. Suddenly, the bell began to vibrate, emitting a low, bone-chilling hum. The air around them seemed to warp, and shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. "Keep going," Liam urged, positioning himself between Emma and the advancing shadows. Emma's voice grew louder, the chant resonating with power. The bell's hum intensified, and the shadows recoiled, their forms dissipating into the ether. With a final, powerful note, the bell cracked and fell silent, its power broken. Emma and Liam exchanged relieved glances. "One down," Emma said, her voice shaking. "Let's get back to the others." The headmaster's office. Sarah and Jake sneaked into the headmaster's office, a place filled with dusty books and old furniture. The air was thick with the smell of aged paper and a sense of foreboding. They quickly located a hidden compartment behind a large, ornate desk, where they found an old, leather-bound diary. Sarah opened it, revealing pages filled with Whitlock's spidery handwriting. "This is it," she whispered. "Let's get out of here." But as they turned to leave, the room grew cold, and the door slammed shut. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to come alive, forming into grotesque shapes that blocked their escape. Jake grabbed a nearby book and hurled it at one of the figures, but it passed through harmlessly. "What do we do now?" Sarah, thinking quickly, began to read aloud from the diary, reciting a passage that Whitlock had written about banishing spirits. The shadows hissed and recoiled, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. As she continued reading, the shadows dissipated, and the door creaked open. They hurried out, the diary clutched tightly in Sarah's hands. The cemetery. Meanwhile, Mr. Hargrove and Nora approached the school cemetery, a forgotten corner of the grounds overgrown with weeds and shrouded in mist. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. They located a grave marked with Whitlock's name, the headstone cracked and withered. Nora began to dig, her hands trembling. As they unearthed the locket, a chill ran through the air, and ghostly apparitions rose from the ground, their faces twisted with anguish. Mr. Hargrove held the Book of Shadows, reciting an incantation to cleanse the area. The apparitions howled in despair, their forms dissolving into the mist as the locket's malevolent power was neutralized. Nora clasped the locket tightly. "It's done." The group reconvened in the library, their faces pale but determined. They had faced unimaginable horrors and had triumphed, but they knew that the final confrontation with Mrs. Thorne and the darkness she commanded was imminent. Mr. Hargrove addressed the group. "We've destroyed the artifacts, but the true source of the darkness lies with Mrs. Thorne. We need to confront her and end this once and for all." Emma, Liam, Sarah, Jake, and Nora nodded in agreement. They had come this far and were ready to face whatever awaited them. Together, they would uncover the final secrets of Blackwood Boarding School and confront the darkness head-on. The group gathered their courage and made their way to Mrs. Thorne's office. The air was thick with tension, and a palpable sense of foreboding hung over them. Each step they took seemed to echo with the weight of the task ahead. They arrived at the headmistress's office, its imposing door standing like a barrier between them and their goal. Mr. Hargrove, holding the Book of Shadows, nodded to Emma, who stepped forward and knocked firmly on the door. "Enter," came Mrs. Thorne's voice, cold and unyielding. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Thorne seated at her desk, her piercing gaze fixed on them. The room was dimly lit, the shadows dancing ominously across the walls. "So, you've come to confront me," she said, her tone laced with disdain. "Do you really believe you can stop what has been set in motion for decades?" Mr. Hargrove stepped forward, his voice steady. We have destroyed the artifacts and neutralized the dark energies you've been harnessing. This ends tonight, Mrs. Thorne. Mrs. Thorne stood, her eyes flashing with anger. You are fools. You have no idea what you are dealing with. The darkness is not something that can be simply eradicated. It is a part of Blackwood, and it will consume you all. Emma stepped forward, her voice unwavering. We know about the rituals, the students who vanished, and the gateway. We're here to put an end to your reign of terror. Mrs. Thorne's expression twisted into a malevolent grin. Very well. If you wish to challenge me, then so be it. With a wave of her hand, the room was plunged into darkness. The air grew cold, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Shadows writhed and twisted, forming into grotesque shapes that loomed menacingly over the group. Mr. Hargrove opened the Book of Shadows and began to recite a powerful incantation. The words resonated through the room, pushing back the darkness and causing the shadowy figures to waver. Mrs. Thorne raised her arms, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. You cannot defeat me, she hissed. The darkness is mine to command. Emma, Liam, and their friends formed a circle around Mr. Hargrove, their hands clasped together as they chanted along with him. The air crackled with energy as the incantation grew stronger, and the shadows recoiled, screaming in agony. Mrs. Thorne's face contorted with rage and fear. No! This cannot be, she shrieked, her voice echoing through the chamber. The ground beneath them began to shake, and the walls pulsed with a dark energy. The shadows swirled around Mrs. Thorne, wrapping her in a cocoon of darkness. But the group's combined efforts pushed back against the malevolent force, their determination unyielding. With a final, powerful incantation, Mr. Hargrove directed the energy toward Mrs. Thorne. The darkness around her exploded in a blinding flash of light, and a deafening roar filled the room. When the light faded, Mrs. Thorne lay on the floor, unconscious, her power broken. The room was still, the oppressive energy that had haunted Blackwood Boarding School dissipated. Emma, Liam, and their friends stood in stunned silence, barely able to believe what they had accomplished. Mr. Hargrove approached Mrs. Thorne, checking her pulse. She's alive, he said quietly. But her connection to the darkness is severed. The school is free. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Blackwood Boarding School began to change. The oppressive gloom that had hung over the school lifted, and a sense of peace settled in. The students and staff, unaware of the true extent of what had happened, noticed the change and felt a newfound sense of hope. Emma, Liam, Sarah, Jake, and Nora knew that they had faced a great evil and triumphed. They had uncovered the dark secrets of their school and freed it from the grip of a malevolent force. Their bond was stronger than ever, forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. Mr. Hargrove, now acting headmaster, thanked them for their bravery and dedication. You have saved this school, he said. And I have no doubt that Blackwood's future is brighter because of you. As they stood together, looking out over the school grounds, Emma felt a sense of closure. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, and now they could move forward, leaving the horrors of the past behind. But they would always remember the lessons they had learned and the courage it had taken to confront the darkness. Blackwood Boarding School had been saved, and its students could now look to the future with hope and determination. A new beginning. In the weeks following the confrontation with Mrs. Thorne, Blackwood Boarding School underwent a transformation. The oppressive gloom that had long shrouded the campus lifted, and a sense of renewal filled the air. The once dark and foreboding halls now seemed brighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the very foundations of the building. Emma and Liam returned to their studies, but their bond had grown stronger through their shared experiences. They found solace in knowing they had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged victorious. Their bravery had earned them the respect and admiration of their peers, who had sensed a change in the school's atmosphere but were unaware of the true danger that had been averted. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the ancient oak tree in the courtyard, Liam turned to Emma. "Do you think the darkness is truly gone?" he asked, his voice tinged with lingering doubt. Emma looked thoughtful. "I think we've severed its connection to the school. but the echoes of what happened here will always remain. It's up to us to ensure that history doesn't repeat itself. Sarah, Jake, and Nora. Sarah, Jake, and Nora also felt the impact of their victory. Sarah, the tech-savvy hacker, had discovered a newfound confidence in her abilities. She continued to help the school, using her skills to improve the outdated systems and ensure the safety of the students. Jake, the adventurous athlete, had gained a deeper appreciation for teamwork and courage. He began organizing events and activities that encouraged students to support and trust one another, fostering a stronger sense of community. Nora, the quiet observer with a talent for puzzles, found her place as a mentor for younger students. Her experiences had taught her the value of perseverance and attention to detail, qualities she now shared with those who looked up to her. Mr. Hargrove's leadership. Mr. Hargrove, now the acting headmaster, took on his new role with a sense of purpose. He was determined to lead Blackwood Boarding School into a brighter future, free from the shadows of its past. He implemented changes that prioritized the well-being and safety of the students, ensuring that the dark secrets of the school would never again threaten its inhabitants. He also made it a point to educate the staff and students about the school's history, including the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of ethical practices. His transparency helped build a stronger, more informed community. Mrs. Thorne's fate. Mrs. Thorne, stripped of her connection to the darkness, was placed under medical care. Her once icy demeanor had given way to a fragile, broken woman, haunted by the consequences of her actions. She was kept under close observation, her future uncertain. The school board, now fully aware of the events that had transpired, decided to keep her presence a secret to avoid panic among the students and their families. They were committed to ensuring that the school moved forward without the shadow of Mrs. Thorne's influence. Uncovering the truth. The group continued to investigate the remaining mysteries of Blackwood Boarding School. They discovered journals and records that shed light on the lives of the students who had vanished, finally bringing closure to their families. Memorials were erected in their honor, ensuring that their stories were remembered. Emma, Liam, and their friends also delved deeper into the rituals and practices of Edgar Whitlock, ensuring that any remnants of his dark legacy were eradicated. They worked with Mr. Hargrove to safeguard the school against any future threats, creating a network of protections and safeguards. A united community. The students and staff of Blackwood Boarding School came together as a stronger, more united community. The trials they had faced had forged bonds of trust and resilience. The school, once a place of hidden horrors, now stood as a beacon of hope and renewal. Emma, Liam, Sarah, Jake, and Nora often reflected on their journey, grateful for the friendships they had forged and the strength they had discovered within themselves. They knew that the darkness they had faced would always be a part of their history, but they were determined to build a brighter future for Blackwood Boarding School. The story of Blackwood Boarding School's dark past and its journey to redemption served as a reminder that even in the face of great evil, courage, friendship, and determination could triumph. The school, its students, and its staff were forever changed, united by the challenges they had overcome and the hope they carried forward. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey through the haunted halls of Blackwood Boarding School. If you enjoyed this tale of mystery and suspense, be sure to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts and theories. And don't forget to check out our other spine-tingling stories right here on the channel. Until next time, stay curious and stay scared.